Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Woody Hayes Athletic Center for the Buckeye Report, the first Buckeye Report of 2022 Fall Training Camp. I'm Brendan Gulick with Andrew Lind. It is really good to be back. It is very hot and sticky inside this not air-conditioned indoor turf field, but the turf looks great in here. It was newly installed in the off-season. That's something that obviously got an awful lot of attention last year, and I think people are going to be excited to see the shoe in person this year. The team was out on the field this morning, reported yesterday for training camp. Today is the first day of actual practice. We are now inside a month, 30 days away from the team's opening game of the season, and boy, isn't that a big one with Notre Dame coming to town. Why don't we just start maybe our reaction to Ryan Day's comments first before we talk a little bit about what we saw out on the field. I kind of felt like it was business as usual. You know, there's a lot of energy and buzz typically that's around the first day of camp, but I don't know if I necessarily felt that today the way it felt kind of business-like.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think it was kind of more an extension of the spring. You know, they've kind of already, CJ's firmly entrenched as a starter at quarterback. You know, they know what they need to do to accomplish their goals this year. And really, it's just a carryover of that. They just happen to be, 2 months off. And they know what their goals are. They know how to accomplish those goals. It's just a matter of putting it together, really.
Kind of weird to not have a quarterback battle to talk about this year.
Yeah.
Refreshing, but weird. But there are definitely plenty of conversation points. And I want to start with what Coach Day said to a question I asked him about the opener. You know, everybody thinks about last year and says, look, Oregon was the big game on the beginning of the schedule. No offense to Minnesota. They're a good team. They had a great offensive line. I think maybe they gave Ohio State more fits than people anticipated. But it was that Oregon game that had everybody's attention. They were a legitimate CFP caliber program and had those kinds of goals. And obviously that game didn't end well for the Buckeyes. This week, or I should say this year, you don't have a game to get ready for that game. That game is week one. You've got a Notre Dame team that has been to the CFP before. They've got as much momentum and energy around their program right now as they've had in a long time, and their expectations are through the roof. The Buckeyes, thankfully, a little bit more established this year. I think it took a little while for Ohio State to get over all of the missed practice time from spring ball through COVID 2 years ago. And then obviously the chaos of 2 seasons ago, not knowing if they were going to have a season, inserting a bunch of young players. There was so much they had to work through. I think they're, at this point, they're past that enough. That's not a concern. But you still have a huge game week one. You better be ready. Ryan Day said, look, these guys have calluses. They've got scars, but they've also got some stars on their chest from the way they've played in some big games, and that they'd be ready for Notre Dame.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about it, and you had mentioned that, they only had 8 games in 2020. It didn't really allow any backups or any, the young guys to get any experience. And then last year, having a full slate of 13 games and some of them blowouts allowed those players to, get some much needed playing time. And then this year when they're competing for, spots along the offensive line or in the secondary or those kind of things, those players are already experienced enough where you don't necessarily feel as like uncomfortable maybe with where they're at in their progression and those kind of things. And obviously you'd like to, maybe from a standpoint, have 3 non-conference games that, aren't that big of a deal so that you can kind of build up toward the end. But Ohio State doesn't have that luxury this year. I mean, I guess it's a luxury for us that we get to watch, probably the premier non-conference game of the season in week one. But yeah, I think it's just, a lot of focus is going to be on that game. You have to win that game. And I mean, I guess, you can lose that game and still make the playoffs, but that's not how you want to start out the season, especially with everything that they returned this year.
I mean, Ohio State's going to be favored in every game they play. And I think there's a pretty good possibility they're a double-digit favorite against Notre Dame. I don't know what the line is at this point. It might even be too far out to bet on it. But I would expect that Ohio State is going to be a double-digit favorite against the Irish. If nothing else, because they returned so many of the key skill position players on offense. There are some questions about the depth of the offensive line. The tight end room looks like it's probably coming together a little bit better where they are right now this year than where they were at this point last year. G. Scott maybe developing his body a little bit better. Ryan Day really praised Cade Stover's offseason and the way he attacked things. I don't know if there's any jockeying between the tight end room and the linebacker room for Cade Stover's services anymore. It would be great to see him take a good step forward. But I mean, the offensive expectations are through the roof. And to me, that was another big point Ryan Day made. I think the expectation that this offense is going to go out and just leave the country again the way they did last year. Ryan Day tried to pump the brakes on that. I don't know if anybody's believing him, but he tried to say, hey, look, this is a new team, a new group. Let's see.
Yeah, I mean, part of me understands where he's coming from, just because, especially at wide receiver, you lost 2 first-round picks. There's a tight end who was a third-round pick that you don't have anymore in Jeremy Rucker, and there's these little things that could make you hesitate and say, okay, well, they might not score 48 points a game this year, put up 570 yards per game, but at the same time, 45 points and 530 yards per game is still pretty dang good. So, I mean, I think maybe he's just kind of saying, there's a lot that we have to work on to get to that point. But, I mean, really, there's no reason that they can't have the number 1 offense in the country.
No, they should. I mean, that should be the expectation. I don't know if they're going to say that publicly, but they return so many pieces from a group that's done that. Think about where we were a year ago at the running back position. You thought highly of Travion Henderson. Yeah. Evan Pryor came in pretty highly recruited. There were rumblings that Mayan Williams was going to be a part of the offense, but it was kind of like, let's see where the running back spot's at. Now you come into this year, I don't know a better running back group in the country. I mean, from like a 1-2 punch. Yeah. I mean, geez, with Henderson and Williams kind of locked in right now as those top 2 guys. You can have some balance if you get some depth at the offensive line, which to me is the absolute number 1 priority on the offensive side of the ball, is figure out some depth, because Paris Johnson's going to play left tackle. DeJuan Jones is going to play right tackle. And I thought both those guys today looked really good in the beginning part of practice that we got to see. Luke Whippler's going to be your center, and it sure sounds like Matthew Jones and Donovan Jackson are going to play guard.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's just kind of important for them to find that balance of running and passing, because if you look back to 2018, for example, they had Dwayne Haskins throwing the ball all over, but then when they ran into trouble, it's because they couldn't establish the run game. And I think if you kind of look back at last year as well, in the 2 losses to Oregon and Michigan, it was kind of the same thing. They couldn't really establish the run. The defense knew what they were doing, and that caused them issues. And I think that, if that's a prime focus for them in the preseason and fall camp, then, that's going to translate. And if they can establish a run, have more of a balanced attack, that's only going to make the offense more dangerous, because then you're not going to really know what's going on or where they're going to, go with it. They're not just going to throw it all over the place.
On the defensive side of the ball, I think that's where a lot of people's attention is going to be, especially this time of year, trying to figure out, okay, if this defense can play like the top 10 defense that Ryan Day said last week in Indianapolis that he expects, how do they lose? Or at least they're going to get to the college football playoff, you would think. The overwhelming odds would suggest that. It's early, a lot of things to figure out, but Jim Knowles has been here now for several months. Perry Eliano, Tim Walton have been here for several months. They have kind of identified the system they want to use. We're going to see some interesting things at linebacker. I think Tommy Eichenberg is going to be a feature piece at linebacker, especially the way he played in the Rose Bowl. Certainly get the impression Steel Chambers has done enough to be the other guy that's going to sort of have to get beat out. Yeah. But what role might CJ Hicks play as a true freshman? Diamante Traynham, he's an athletic specimen. The kid is really, really talented. I have to think he's going to find his way on the field. Taraja Mitchell's back. Cody Simon, how does he factor in? They've got some talent at that spot and way more experience than a year ago right now. And you're going to play with basically 3 safeties. I would think Tanner McAllister is going to be part of that group. Ronnie Hickman was probably Ohio State's biggest surprise in a pleasant way on the defensive side last year. There's a lot to work out right now because they got to be ready against Notre Dame.
Well, I think the top 10 expectation for a defense that was, let's face it, was really bad last year. That might be a little bit too high, at least, from my perspective, because a top 10 defense, is going to have stars, really. If you look back to 2019, you had Chase Young, you had Jeff Okudah, those kind of players who were like top 5 NFL draft picks. And they were the reason, in Jeff Hafley's defense that they took that next step and were elite in that aspect. And, we might get surprised that, there might be somebody who steps up this year and takes their game to the next level. But as of right now, you don't necessarily see that. So I think that top 10 might be a little bit too high of expectations. But even then, if you have a top 30 defense, I still think that gets you to the playoffs.
That should be good enough.
I mean, with that offense, a top 50 defense might even get you there. But, I think 30 is probably a more realistic expectation.
And I think when, Ryan Day had that sort of brought to his attention earlier, he didn't walk back his comments. He almost doubled down on them when he said, look, people have written about and talked about the comment he made at Media Day last week about having a top 10 defense. He said, I expect a top 10 offense and a top 10 special teams. That's the expectation when you play at a program like Ohio State. And the reality is, if you can meet those three marks, it doesn't guarantee anything, but it gives you a really good chance to achieve the goals that this program sets for itself. Beat the team up north, win the Big Ten title to get to the college football playoff and win a national championship. And boy, I think the thing that struck me most as we were watching practice earlier is that for as good as they were, they did not achieve any of those three goals last year. Mm-hmm. And so guys are jacked up and flying around and having fun with no pads on. It's the first day of camp. And there's plenty of optimism and guys are ready to go. But by the same token, there seems to be a hunger right now, recognizing that especially that game in late November in the snow in Ann Arbor, it didn't go well. And that's got to change this year.
Well, I think that to me itself is the biggest difference between this year and last year. Last year they were coming in, there was uncertainty at quarterback, but they were, they won 4 straight Big Ten titles. They reached playoff twice, within that time. And, this year they're coming off of a season where there was just really a lot of disappointment. And, you want to obviously have that edge. I think that's what Day keeps referring to it as, is an edge that he sees in this team. And to have that before you even started fall camp is obviously a great sign.
He uses the words competitive stamina an awful lot. He talked about how, especially in the rivalry game, the first half, they were fine. You don't win the game by halftime. They were right there. And he said, you look at the second half and that's where things crumbled. That happened against Oregon too. But it didn't happen against Utah. And I think maybe that's where, I don't think the team has taken any victory laps winning a bowl game that was not part of the college football playoff. But maybe that was the part of his comment where he said, look, they do have some stars on their chest from the way they played well. Utah's got a lot of people's attention right now as a potential college football playoff team to maybe be the 4th team in. That's a really good program, and the Buckeyes played against them really well in a resilient way last year.
Well, I think that could have went, two very different ways, really.
Sure.
If they go down 14-0 in the first quarter and just mail it in, like that, we don't have the same expectations maybe coming into this year. It's, you look back in years past, the one that always kind of brings that comes to my mind. They came out of the 2005 season. They played Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl, and everybody, after they beat Notre Dame pretty handily, everybody assumed that they were going to, go to the national championship or win the national championship the next year. And, that game was rather meaningless as well. It was just not part of the national championship, anything like that. And then very similar to this year, you could have just mailed it in, but you're coming off a win that was a great comeback, plenty of stars, record setting, all that kind of stuff. So plenty to build upon and say, look, if we play at our best, this right here, that second half, that's our best, and we're not going to lose to anybody at that point.
Ohio State is just off and rolling. There's a lot of work to be done for this team. They're going to check into the hotel this weekend. Ryan Day, 2 weeks of, being together just kind of eliminates some other distractions, how it's an important time for them to try to stay as focused as they can on football before they flip the page to, hey, this is specific Notre Dame prep, not just let's see what we got kind of thing. These are really important weeks as the Buckeyes get ready for a season. And by the way, their Big Ten openers, not exactly an easy game either. Wisconsin is often one of the best teams in the conference. And thankfully, Ohio State's going to have a couple of non-conference games that they should win handily against Arkansas State and Toledo. But you're playing 2 really, really good teams in the first month of the season. We're going to find out exactly what this team is made of. I can't wait to kick it off.
Yeah, and I think that if you even look at the schedule beyond that, I mean, they're pretty lucky that they have pretty much every difficult game at home. I know Michigan State's in there in October. That might be a little bit tricky because
Penn State too.
And Penn State as well. So there's a lot of good games on the schedule, and I mean, really, we're looking forward to it.
Iowa's going to be here. Michigan's going to be here. season tickets are no longer available. I hope you got yours because it is quite a home schedule here in 2022. And of course, we're going to be here with you every step of the way. Looking forward to following the Buckeyes as closely as we can throughout the year. Certainly hope you'll make Buckeyes Now part of your daily stop as we try to give you the latest info on the team, both from the facility and certainly out on the recruiting trail as well. Any final thoughts for the first Buckeye Report of the year?
We'll see you tomorrow.
That's right. We will be here tomorrow. Tony Alford, running backs coach, and a few of the running backs are going to be available to us. We will not talk to Coach Day again, I believe, until the 11th. That's the next time, next Thursday, that he'll be available to the media. There are 4 practices this fall that are open to the media for the beginning of practice. Today and tomorrow, Thursday and Friday here the first week, are 2 of those. The other 2 are on, I believe, the 11th and the 15th. So those are coming up here in a week and a half or so. All right. For Andrew Lind, I'm Brendan Gulick. We'll see you again real soon. Buckeye Breakdown Podcast and Buckeyes Now on Sports Illustrated. See you tomorrow.